When I think back to 2019, I can't believe how trusting someone to take care of me turned into losing every single dollar I had saved for retirement. I never saw myself as the kind of man who would hand over $400,000 to someone I'd known for less than 2 years. I was careful, always skeptical of deals that seemed too good, always the one reading consumer reports before buying a toaster. But it turns out, even the most cautious people can get swept into something they don't understand when they're vulnerable. I wasn't naive. I wasn't even particularly lonely at first. But I had $400,000 saved up and thought that would be enough to give me a comfortable retirement after years of grinding through sales quotas and medical conferences. I thought I'd found someone who genuinely cared about my well-being, someone who wanted to build a future together, someone who would be there when my health inevitably declined. I was wrong about everything. I was 62 when I first started having serious problems with my hip. I'd spent decades in pharmaceutical sales in San Diego, which meant a lot of driving, a lot of standing at medical conventions, and a lot of wear and tear on my body. By 2018, I could barely walk without significant pain. My doctor recommended hip replacement surgery, but when I looked at the costs in the United States, even with Medicare, I was looking at serious out-of-pocket expenses that would eat into my retirement savings. I had exactly $400,000 saved up. It wasn't a fortune, but I felt secure about the future. I'd worked for the same pharmaceutical company for 31 years, maxed out my 401k contributions whenever possible, and lived relatively modestly. I also had my Social Security, which was around $2,100 a month. Between the savings and the Social Security, I calculated I could live comfortably for the rest of my life if I was smart about it. I got divorced back in 1998. My ex-wife and I had one daughter together, Emily, who was living in Oregon with her own family by then. The divorce wasn't particularly nasty, but it wasn't friendly either. We just grew apart over the years, wanted different things, and eventually decided to go our separate ways. By the time 2018 came around, I was 62 and completely on my own. I had a small apartment in San Diego, a routine that revolved around doctor's appointments and occasional dinners with old colleagues, and an overwhelming sense that I was just waiting around to get older. That's when I started researching medical tourism. I'd heard people talk about going to Mexico or Thailand for procedures, how the quality could be just as good for a fraction of the cost. The Philippines kept coming up in my research. Joint replacement surgery there was about 70% cheaper than in the US, and the facilities looked modern and professional in all the photos I saw online. I'd never been to Southeast Asia before, never really thought about it, but the more I researched, the more it made sense. By the time late 2018 came around, I started thinking, why not? I could get the surgery done, recover somewhere warm and affordable, and maybe even stay for a few months to see if I liked it. I had nothing tying me to San Diego except habit. I could have a better quality of life there on the money I had. I could live near the beach, have someone cook for me, and actually feel like my retirement funds meant something. The cost of living in the Philippines was so much lower that my $400,000 could last decades if I was smart about it. I flew into Cebu City in February 2019 for my surgery. The hospital was called Cebu Doctors University Hospital, and it looked as modern as anything I'd seen back home. The procedure went smoothly. They replaced my left hip, and I was transferred to a recovery facility about 3 days later. That's where I met Bianca. She was 34 years old, though she looked younger. She had this very calm, professional demeanor, always checking my vitals, making sure I took my medications on time, asking how my pain levels were. She wasn't overly chatty at first, just efficient and competent, which I actually appreciated. I'd had enough of nurses back in San Diego who treated you like a number. But after the first week, she started opening up more. She told me she'd been a nurse for about 8 years, that she'd worked in Saudi Arabia for a while but came back to the Philippines to be closer to her family. She had a young daughter, around 7 years old, from a previous relationship that hadn't worked out. She was a single mother trying to make ends meet, working long shifts at the recovery facility because the pay was better than the public hospitals. I found myself looking forward to her shifts. She had this way of making me feel like I wasn't just another patient. She remembered details about conversations we'd had, asked follow-up questions about my life back in San Diego, and genuinely seemed interested in my recovery. When I complained about the bland, hospital food, she brought me some Filipino dishes from home. When I was feeling discouraged about my physical therapy progress, she stayed after her shift ended to encourage me. By the third week, I was walking with a cane and getting ready to be discharged. The hospital recommended I stay in Cebu for at least another month for follow-up appointments and to make sure everything was healing properly. Bianca suggested I rent a small apartment nearby instead of staying in a hotel, said it would be much more affordable and comfortable. She even helped me find a modest one-bedroom in Lahug that cost about $300 a month. What surprised me was that she offered to check on me even after I was officially discharged. She said she could stop by after her shifts to make sure I was taking my medications correctly, help with wound care, things like that. She insisted she wasn't asking for payment, that she just wanted to make sure I was okay. I offered to pay her anyway, seemed only fair, and she very reluctantly accepted $50 a week. When I called my daughter Emily and told her that I met a nurse in Cebu and she's actually younger than you, I could hear her sigh through the phone as if to say, "Here we go, Dad." But I didn't care. I felt better than I had in years. My hip didn't hurt anymore. I was in a beautiful city, and I had someone who genuinely seemed to care about my well-being. I'll admit there was an age gap. I was 62 and she was 34. That's 28 years. But she said she didn't care about age, that she valued stability and kindness over anything else. She told me that Filipino culture respected older men, that maturity was attractive. In a way, I felt like she was more emotionally mature than women my own age back home who seemed bitter about their divorces and set in their ways. Part of me knew that caregivers and patients sometimes develop complicated relationships, and part of me had already come to the conclusion that she probably saw me as someone who could provide financial security for her and her daughter. But I chose to believe that she also genuinely cared about me. I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe it. For the first 2 months, everything was exactly what I needed. Bianca came by my apartment almost every evening after her shift. She'd check my surgical site, make sure I was doing my exercises, and often she'd cook dinner for both of us. She made adobo, sinigang, pancit, things I'd never tried before but quickly grew to love. I found myself looking forward to her visits more than I expected. After about 6 weeks, my follow-up appointments were done and I was medically cleared to fly back to the United States. But I didn't want to leave. The weather in Cebu was beautiful. My cost of living was a fraction of what it was in San Diego, and most importantly, I had Bianca. We'd progressed from a patient-caregiver relationship to something that felt like genuine companionship. That's when we decided to take things further. Bianca was still living with her mother and daughter in a cramped house in Talisay City, about 40 minutes from where I was staying. She was traveling over an hour each way to get to work and then coming to see me after. It seemed ridiculous. I suggested she move into my apartment. It would be more convenient for her, and honestly, I didn't want to be alone anymore. She was hesitant at first, concerned about what her family would think, worried about her daughter. But I told her we could find a bigger place, somewhere with an extra bedroom so her daughter Maya could stay with us on weekends. We found a 2-bedroom apartment in Benilad for $500 a month, still incredibly affordable by American standards. Around this time, she was working at the recovery facility making about 18,000 pesos a month, which was roughly $350. It wasn't much, especially considering she was supporting her daughter and contributing to her mother's household expenses. I agreed to send her mother $250 a month to help support Maya, school supplies, clothes, food, things like that. I felt like this was a fair amount and it gave Bianca peace of mind knowing her daughter was taken care of. I was happy to make these changes because a part of me had always been looking for a connection, for someone to go home to in the evenings. We'd cook together, watch Filipino soap operas that I pretended to understand, walk along the Cebu IT Park in the evenings. She was attentive in ways I hadn't experienced in decades. She made sure I took my blood pressure medication, reminded me about my physical therapy exercises, and genuinely seemed invested in my health and happiness. After we had been living together for about 4 months, I had to make a decision. My tourist visa was running out, and I either had to leave the Philippines or commit to staying longer term. Bianca and I had talked about the future, and she'd made it clear she wanted something permanent. She wanted security for herself and her daughter, wanted to know that I was serious about our relationship. I pulled the trigger and asked her to marry me. It wasn't a grand romantic gesture. We were sitting on the couch watching TV when I just said, "We should get married. Make this official." She cried and said yes, and we decided to get married at the Mandaue City Hall within the month. We were both excited about it. I felt like I'd found a second chance at life, and she seemed genuinely happy to build a future with me. After things went smoothly for about 6 months as a married couple, it only seemed logical to stop renting and actually buy property. I wasn't about to rush into things, though. And first things first, let's just buy one house. Bianca had always talked about wanting to stay in Cebu City proper, somewhere modern and convenient. We looked at condos in Cebu Business Park and Ayala Center Cebu, beautiful units with amenities like swimming pools and gyms. But after looking around for about a month, she started suggesting we look at houses instead. She said a house would be better long term, that we could have space for Maya to have her own bedroom, maybe even a small garden. We found a property in Talamban, a developing area in the northern part of Cebu City. It was a 3-bedroom house with a small yard in a quiet subdivision. The area was still growing, but there were new developments going up everywhere, and it seemed like property values would appreciate. I looked at comparable properties in the area and researched recent sales prices. After all the research I did, it seemed like it was a good price, $120,000, for a decent-sized house in a secure subdivision. The only problem was the legal situation. As a foreigner, I couldn't own land in the Philippines. I knew this from my research, but it still frustrated me. I could own a condo unit under the foreign quota system, but not land or a house built on land. That meant, if we wanted this house, it had to be in Bianca's name. You should have thought harder about that. I should have looked for a condo instead. But my wife said, "Buy it in my name. We're married. It's our house," which I probably shouldn't have done, but I did. I sold $120,000 worth of my retirement investments, mostly mutual funds and some stocks I'd held for years, and we purchased that house. The transaction was straightforward enough. We paid cash, signed all the paperwork, and moved in within a few weeks. The deed and title were 100% in Bianca's name. I wasn't listed anywhere on the documents. At first, everything seemed fine. We furnished the house, had Maya come stay with us full-time instead of just weekends, and started settling into what felt like a real family life. Bianca quit her nursing job. She said the hours were too demanding, and she wanted to focus on taking care of me and Maya. I was fine with that. My Social Security covered our monthly expenses, and I still had $280,000 in my retirement fund. For the first few months in the house, life was genuinely good. I felt like I'd made the right decision, but there was this nagging feeling in the back of my mind every time I looked at the property documents. This house that I'd paid for entirely, this house that was supposed to be our family home, wasn't mine. Not legally, not in any way that mattered. About 8 months after buying the house, Bianca suddenly got it into her head that we needed, of all things, to start a business. Specifically, a medical clinic. I can't overstate just how much I didn't want anything to do with it. She had this whole pitch worked out. She said that with her nursing background and my experience in the pharmaceutical industry, we could open a small clinic offering primary care services, minor procedures, maybe even some medical tourism packages for foreigners who needed basic health care at affordable prices. She'd talked to former colleagues who were doctors and nurses looking for work. She'd researched locations. She'd even sketched out a business plan. I resisted. I was 64 years old at this point, retired, and I'd spent my entire career in sales, not healthcare administration. I told her I had no interest in running a business. dealing with permits and regulations, managing employees. I just wanted to enjoy my retirement, but she was relentless, more serious than ever before about anything we'd discussed. She kept bringing it up every few days, showing me research about the growing demand for healthcare services in Cebu, talking about how we could help people while also building something that would generate income. She said, "This is my big chance to do something meaningful, to use my training for more than just checking vitals." The manipulation tactic that finally got me was when she said, "When you're gone, I'll need something to support myself and Maya. I can't just rely on what you leave behind. I need to be able to stand on my own." Hearing that hit me in a way that I didn't want to admit. I was nearly 65. I had high blood pressure and cholesterol issues, and she was in her mid-32s, still healthy and full of life. And she was going to outlive me by decades, probably. It was the first time she directly referenced my mortality, and it felt like she was being practical and mature about our age difference. Against everything in me telling me not to, I felt like I had no choice, and I let her have the money. We found a small commercial space in Mandaue City, just across from Cebu City, in an area with decent foot traffic. The rent was $800 a month, which seemed manageable. But then came all the other costs: medical equipment, furniture, computers, permits, business registration, initial inventory of medications and supplies. Bianca handled most of the setup since she knew the medical industry, but she kept coming back with new expenses I hadn't anticipated. In total, I sold another $175,000 of my retirement investments to fund the clinic setup. The business was registered as Med Clinic under her name. I couldn't be listed as the owner since foreigners couldn't own businesses in the Philippines without complex corporate structures. She assured me we were partners, that the profits would be shared, but legally speaking, I had no claim to the business whatsoever. The clinic opened in November 2020, right as the pandemic was creating chaos everywhere. At first, Bianca was excited, busy hiring staff, 2 nurses and a doctor who came in for consultations 3 days a week. They offered basic services, checkups, vaccinations, minor wound care, blood tests sent to external labs. For the first 2 months, she'd come home and tell me about how many patients they'd seen, how much revenue they'd generated. It sounded promising. But by month 3, the numbers started dropping. She blamed the pandemic lockdowns, said people weren't going out for non-emergency care, that businesses everywhere were struggling. Then came the equipment problems. The autoclave machine broke and needed to be replaced $3,000. The computer system they'd bought was too slow and needed upgrading $1,500. The doctor they'd hired demanded a higher salary or he'd leave an extra $400 a month. Each time, Bianca would come to me with these unexpected expenses, and each time I felt trapped. I'd already invested $175,000. What was another few thousand to keep it running? Before I knew it, I'd put another $18,000 into the clinic over 6 months just to keep it operational. By mid-2021, Bianca stopped talking about the clinic as much. She'd leave in the morning, come home in the evening, and if I asked how things were going, she'd give vague answers. "It's fine. We had some patients today. Still working on growing the client base." She became defensive anytime I asked specific questions about revenue or expenses. I told her we needed to have a serious conversation about whether the clinic was viable, that we couldn't keep pouring money into something that wasn't generating profit. She'd cry and say I didn't believe in her, that I was giving up too easily, that businesses take time to become profitable. Every time, though, when she brought up needing more money, I said I was going to say no, but she just kept pushing and pushing. She'd bring up how much we'd already invested, how we couldn't let it fail now, how it would all be worth it once things stabilized. And I'd give in because the alternative was listening to her be miserable for days, walking around the house in silence, making me feel like I was the villain for wanting to protect what little retirement savings I had left. Meanwhile, the family requests escalated. The $250 a month I'd been sending to her mother somehow wasn't enough anymore. There was always an emergency. Maya needed dental work, $400. Bianca's brother had a motorcycle accident and needed help with hospital bills, $1,200. Her mother's house needed a new roof, $2,500. Her cousin wanted to go to college and needed tuition assistance, $1,800. It was always about the family. Every single request came with a detailed explanation of why it was urgent, why they couldn't manage it themselves, why I was the only one who could help. Bianca would present these requests tearfully, talking about how her family had supported her whole life, how Filipino culture meant you took care of your family, how she'd be so ashamed if she couldn't help them. I didn't send them money immediately every time. Sometimes I'd say no, try to stand my ground. But things would not go well between me and Bianca and how she acted around me. I couldn't bear the thought of having a miserable woman next to me ruining my life, the silent treatment for days, the cold shoulder, the pointed comments about how Americans didn't understand family loyalty. So I'd give in. Again and again. By early 2022, I'd sent approximately $37,000 total to her family for various emergencies on top of the regular monthly support. I was keeping track in a notebook because the amounts were getting hard to remember. Every time I looked at my bank balance, I felt sick. We lived in Talamban, which was actually a pretty nice area once you got used to it. The subdivision was quiet. We had security guards at the gate, and most of our neighbors were middle-class Filipino families. The daily routine was simple. I'd wake up, have coffee, maybe walk around the subdivision for exercise, read, watch TV, do some shopping at the nearby mall. Cebu City itself was busy, chaotic, full of traffic and noise and energy, but I liked it in small doses. The food was incredible, fresh seafood, tropical fruits I'd never heard of, and restaurants where a full meal cost less than a coffee back in San Diego. When we went to the beaches outside the city, Moalbol, Oslab, Bantayan Island, I felt genuinely lucky to be living in such a beautiful place. One thing I noticed very quickly being in the Philippines was how cheap everything was compared to the United States. You could get a haircut for $2, a full meal at a local carinderia for $1.50, fresh mangoes for practically nothing. It made me feel like my money should last forever, like I could live comfortably on very little. I tried to integrate. I learned basic Tagalog phrases, salamat, kumusta, magkano, though most people spoke English anyway. I got to know some of Bianca's extended family, attended birthday parties and family gatherings where I was always the only foreigner, smiling politely while everyone spoke rapidly in Cebuano around me. I made a few expat friends at a coffee shop near IT Park. Guys mostly my age or older who'd retired to Cebu with their own Filipino wives or girlfriends. But underneath, I already knew I was caught in something I just couldn't pull myself out of. My retirement savings were disappearing faster than I'd ever planned. I was living in a house I didn't own. I'd funded a business I had no legal claim to, and I was supporting an entire extended family I'd never agreed to support. I felt trapped, but I didn't know how to get out without losing everything, including Bianca. By mid-2022, I'd already spent $350,000 of my original $400,000 retirement fund. I had approximately $50,000 remaining. My original plan had been to live off the interest and dividends from my investments, maybe draw down $15,000, $20,000 a year, and let my Social Security cover day-to-day expenses. Instead, I'd liquidated almost everything, and what remained was sitting in a basic savings account earning essentially nothing. I told myself $2,100 a month from Social Security would be enough to cover our living expenses, but within a year of buying the house and starting the clinic, it was closer to $3,200 a month, and no matter how many times I looked at the figures, I couldn't explain where it was all going. It was Bianca's personal expenses. She'd started getting her nails done weekly, $30, regular salon visits for hair, $80, $100, shopping, trips to Ayala Mall, where she'd buy clothes and cosmetics, family requests that never stopped, education, expenses, medical bills, home repairs. Someone always needed something. the clinic's ongoing losses, still hemorrhaging money every month despite being open over a year, household expenses that seemed higher than they should be, groceries, utilities, Maya's school supplies and activities, and nights where I gave in to spontaneous requests when I didn't want to. One evening in August 2022, I sat Bianca down and told her it couldn't go on like this, that our monthly budget was $2,100 from Social Security and there was no more retirement savings to dip into. I tried to make it sound firm but fair, and I told her that if we wanted to have any kind of future together, we had to stick to it. She nodded and didn't argue, but I could tell she wasn't happy. She had this look on her face like I was being cheap, like I was prioritizing money over our family's well-being. Every request after, that turned into an argument. Every peso questioned, and I found myself second-guessing whether I was the one being unreasonable. She'd say things like, "My family sacrificed so much to accept you," or, in Filipino culture, "Family comes first." But you wouldn't understand that. She'd bring up how much younger she was, how she could have been with someone her own age who could provide better, how lucky I was to have her. The guilt manipulation was constant and exhausting. Things did change after we got married in a way I wasn't expecting. Before we were married, Bianca never asked for anything from me beyond basic living expenses. She was happy and content just being able to spend time together, cook meals, watch movies. But after we were married, I could feel like she was more comfortable asking for things, but not comfortable in a positive way, comfortable in a way that felt entitled. The first major shift came with the family requests. First request, $500. Her mother needed help with property tax. I had no problem with it. It wasn't a lot of money, and it seemed like a legitimate need. Second request, $1,200, her brother's motorcycle accident. 2 months later, and I swallowed my pride and sent it even though I was starting to feel like we were becoming the family ATM. Third request, $2,500, her mother's roof repair. I regret agreeing to this one because when I visited their house a month later, the roof looked exactly the same. When I asked about it, I got vague answers about the contractor delaying the work. Lo and behold, 6 weeks later, and the family wants more money. Always about the family. Always urgent. Always with Bianca as the messenger, crying about how embarrassed she was that her family had to struggle when she was married to an American. It wasn't that I couldn't afford it initially. It was just that I thought we were in a genuine relationship and that she loved me. And if she did, she wouldn't constantly be asking for money for her relatives. I thought partners were supposed to build a life together, not fund an entire extended family's lifestyle. The clinic situation became even more suspicious. By late 2022, Bianca stopped letting me visit the clinic. She'd make excuses. "We're too busy." It would distract the staff. Patients might be uncomfortable with a foreigner hanging around. When I insisted on seeing the financial records, she'd become defensive, saying I didn't trust her, that I was treating her like a child. The few times I did see documentation, the numbers didn't make sense. She'd claim they had 15 patients one day, but the revenue showed only enough for maybe 5 to 6 consultations. When I pointed out discrepancies, she'd blame the bookkeeper, say receipts were missing, promise to fix the accounting system. I started to suspect the clinic was either completely failing or she was taking money out for personal use. Or both. Her behavior at home changed too. She became distant, less affectionate, more irritable. She'd spend hours on her phone in the evening, texting people, and when I'd ask who she was talking to, she'd say it was about the clinic or family matters. She started going out more, meeting with the clinic staff, having dinner with her cousins, and sometimes she wouldn't come home until late at night. One time in October 2022, she went to Manila by herself for what she said was a medical conference. She was gone for 4 days. We had an agreement together that if one of us called the other, we had to pick up straight away. However, when she was in Manila, she was very difficult to contact. The excuses came in waves. Going to training sessions with no phone allowed, accidentally leaving the phone in the hotel room, No battery because she forgot her charger. Bad signal in certain parts of Manila. At this point, I'm definitely sure there is something going on. Whether it was another man, whether she was hiding money, whether she was planning something I didn't know. But my gut told me something was very wrong. I wasn't looking at her the same way anymore. The trust was completely broken. Every time she asked for money, every time she gave me an excuse about the clinic, every time she came home late, I felt like a fool. A six-year-old fool who'd handed over his entire life savings to a woman 32 years younger who saw him as nothing more than a bank account. I was quite friendly with one expat who lived a few streets over, an Australian guy named Barry who was about 70 and married to a Filipina about 40. And when I told him I'd put the house in my wife's name, funded a clinic in her name, and sent tens of thousands to her family, I remember him just shaking his head saying, "Mate, you've got to protect yourself. Get a post-nuptial agreement, get your name on something, anything." I just didn't want to hear it though. I felt like it was too late. Like bringing up legal protection would trigger a fight that would end everything. By the time March 2023 rolled around, I had less than $45,000 left in savings. I knew I couldn't keep funding the clinic anymore, couldn't keep sending money to her family. I had to do something. Things had to change, or I'd be completely broke within a year. I tried to sit down with Bianca and have a calm conversation about our finances, about creating a real budget, about maybe closing the clinic if it wasn't profitable. But she was defensive from the start, crying and saying I was giving up on her dream, that I never believed in her, that I was just like every other foreigner who came to the Philippines and thought Filipinos were all scammers. It only made things worse. She didn't see a problem with the money disappearing. She thought it was normal, that this was just what family did, that I was being selfish for wanting to protect what was left. I couldn't believe I'd let this happen. Every day I felt more trapped. The house I paid for didn't feel like mine because it wasn't. The clinic I funded was. Hemorrhaging money with no end in sight. The woman I married felt like a stranger who only talked to me when she needed something. In June 2023, something happened that I should have seen coming but somehow didn't. I'd been having problems with my blood pressure for a few months, stress, probably, from everything that was going on. One evening, I felt chest pains and shortness of breath. Bianca insisted we go to the emergency room immediately. We went to Changhua Hospital, one of the better private hospitals in Cebu. The doctors ran tests, kept me overnight for observation, and determined I'd had a minor cardiac event, not a full heart attack, but significant enough that I needed to be monitored. They wanted to keep me for at least 3 to 4 days to run more tests, adjust my medications, and make sure I was stable. Bianca was attentive at first. She stayed with me the first night, held my hand, told me everything would be okay. She had access to my wallet, my phone, my ATM cards. I'd given her everything because I was focused on my health and trusted her to handle practical matters. On the second day, she said she needed to go home to check on Maya and handle some things at the clinic. She'd be back in the evening. That seemed reasonable. She didn't come back that evening. When I called her around 8 p.m., she didn't answer. I called again at 9 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m. Nothing. I texted her repeatedly. No response. By the third day, I was panicking. I was stuck in a hospital bed, connected to monitors, and I couldn't reach my wife. I asked the nurses if I could borrow a phone to call my stepdaughter Maya. A nurse helped me, and when Maya answered, she sounded confused. "Where's your mom?" I asked. "She's not here, Tito Preston. She left yesterday morning with some bags. She said she had to go to Manila for something important with the clinic." My heart sank. Manila. Again. With bags. Did she say when she'd be back? No. She just said she'd call me later. I hung up and immediately felt sick. Not from my heart condition, but from the realization of what was happening. I called my bank's customer service line in the United States. I still had one account back home with about $12,000 in it that I kept as an absolute emergency fund. The automated system showed my balance at $47. $47. Someone had transferred $11,953 out 3 days ago. I called my Philippine bank next, the one where I'd deposited the remainder of my retirement savings, about $43,000. That account showed a balance of 1,200 pesos, about $22. Almost all of it had been withdrawn over the past 2 days. Multiple ATM withdrawals of the maximum daily limit, plus one large over-the-counter withdrawal that required my ATM card and PIN, both of which Bianca had. I asked the hospital staff to help me file a police report, but they told me I needed to do it in person at a police station. I was stuck in a hospital bed, medically unable to leave, and my wife had just cleaned out every account I had. When I was finally discharged 4 days later, I took a taxi back to our house in Talamban. I used the small amount of cash I had left in my wallet. The house was empty. Not just empty of people, empty of belongings. Bianca's clothes were gone. Her personal items, jewelry, laptop, all gone. Most of the furniture was still there, but anything of significant value was missing. The TV, the appliances, even some of the decorations I'd bought. I found Maya sitting with her grandmother at their house in Talisay City. The grandmother barely looked at me, just said, "Bianca had to go away for a while." "Business? Where?" I demanded. "I don't know. She doesn't tell me everything." Over the next week, I pieced together what had actually happened through conversations with neighbors, people at the clinic, and eventually a devastating conversation with Bianca's cousin who felt sorry for me. The clinic had never been profitable. In fact, it had closed 4 months earlier, in February 2023, and Bianca had been lying to me the entire time, pretending it was still operating. She'd been pocketing the money I gave her for clinic expenses and using it for something else. She'd been planning to leave for at least 3 months. She'd met someone, a Filipino businessman from Manila, and they'd been seeing each other for over a year. He had money, he had status, and he didn't have the complications of being a foreigner. And the house? The house I'd paid $120,000 cash for? She'd sold it. Not recently, she'd sold it back in April, 2 months before my hospitalization. Sold it to a buyer for $95,000, took the cash, and forged some documents to make the sale look legitimate. The buyer thought they were dealing with the legal owner, which technically they were, since the house was entirely in Bianca's name. The new owners were scheduled to take possession in August 2023. I had about 6 weeks before I'd be evicted from a house I'd paid for. I asked the cousin what was real and what wasn't, and she said, very quietly, "I think Bianca cared about you at first, but then she saw how much money you had, and it changed things. She told me once that she had to secure her future before you got too old or too sick." That was a shocking realization. I'd spent nearly 4 years with her at this point, and for a big portion of that time, she'd been lying to me to get money out of me, planning her exit, waiting for the right moment to take everything and disappear. By the time July 2023 came around, I looked at what remained of my life and did the math. Opening amount. I had started with $400,000 when I came to the Philippines in 2019. Itemized losses. House in Talamban. Stolen through fraudulent sale. $120,000. Medical clinic set up and operations. $193,000. SUV purchased in Bianca's name, now gone. $28,000. Condo rental deposits and furniture, unrecoverable. $4,000. Land in her home province, in her name, worthless to me. $11,000. Family support over 4 years, $37,000. Monthly living expenses beyond Social Security to $7,000. Total spent, lost, $400,000. What remained? Savings left. $69 across 2 bank accounts. Property owned, absolutely nothing. Income, $2,100. Month Social Security, recoverable assets, none. When the house was sold, after all the legal chaos and the buyer trying to work with me to resolve the situation, they were innocent victims too. I got back exactly nothing. The buyer had paid Bianca directly. The money was long gone, and I had no legal standing to claim anything because the property was never in my name. I'd spent 4 years of my life building what I thought was a future with someone, and I'd lost $400,000 over and above what we'd agreed on in the early stages of our relationship. What a nightmare it was. The fact that she'd sold the house behind my back instead of just asking me for money, the fact that she'd faked an entire business for months, the fact that she'd planned her escape while I was in the hospital. I'd have probably been hurt, but maybe understanding if she'd just been honest. If she'd said, "This isn't working, I need to move on," I'd have probably gone along with it and given her something to help her start over. But she went behind my back and basically stole everything I had over a period of years, pretending to love me the entire time. The immediate aftermath was pure survival mode. I didn't know if I should just return to the United States immediately, but then I thought about what I'd be returning to. I had no house, no savings, just Social Security. At least in the Philippines. My $2,100 a month could stretch further than it would in San Diego. I thought about my options. But then I'm thinking, I have nowhere to go in the US, no family who can take me in, and I'd need to find an apartment I could afford on Social Security alone. The math was brutal. Rent in San Diego would eat up most of my income, and I'd be living in poverty. I never saw Bianca again after my hospitalization. She tried to contact me once, about 3 weeks after everything fell apart. A text message, "I'm sorry it had to be this way. I hope you understand I had to think about my future and Maya's future. You'll be okay. You have your Social Security." I didn't respond. What was there to say? Timeline of separation. Week 1. Stayed with an expat friend, Barry, who let me sleep on his couch while I figured things out. Week 2. Found a small studio apartment in La Hug for $200, month bare minimum, but all I could afford. Week 3. Went to the police and tried to file charges for theft and fraud. They took a report but told me realistically, since everything was in her name legally, it would be extremely difficult to prove criminal intent. They suggested I get a lawyer. Week 4. Met with a lawyer who confirmed what I feared. I had no legal recourse. The house was in her name. The clinic was in her name. The money I'd given her could be argued as gifts within a marriage. A civil case would cost tens of thousands of pesos I didn't have and would likely go nowhere. I had to accept that the money was gone, all of it, and she would face no consequences. I didn't return to the United States. I couldn't afford to. Back in the US, I had no house waiting, no family support system, and I'd have been living on $2,100 a month in one of the most expensive states in the country. At least in the Philippines, I could survive on that amount, not comfortably, but survive. New reality, living situation. Studio apartment in a working-class neighborhood, $200, month rent. Financial situation, $2,100, month Social Security, 0 savings. Work situation, too old and too unhealthy to work, living entirely on Social Security. Age factor, 67 years old, post-cardiac event, high blood pressure, alone specific hardships. I'm 67, recovering from a cardiac event, and only $2,100 a month to live on. After rent, utilities, food, and medications, I have maybe $300 left over each month for anything else. You can't live comfortably on that. You can survive, barely, but you can't live with any dignity. The bitterness. The anger has never left me, and the bitterness stayed in everything I did, and all I could think was that I traded away my entire retirement, my security, my peace of mind for something that was never real in the first place. Specific resentments. I gave her $400,000 total. She gave me 4 years of lies. The clinic was always fake, a way to funnel money out of me while looking legitimate. She planned everything while playing the role of loving wife. The disrespect of selling the house while I was hospitalized. When I was at my most vulnerable, I always think back to what I did and the time I had there with her. And if only she'd been honest about needing money, if only she'd been upfront about not wanting to be with an old man forever, things would have turned out differently. I'd have given her something to help her out and moved on. But she chose deception, chose to milk me for everything I had while pretending to love me, and I hate her for it. I hate myself more, but I hate the fact that she showed no mercy, no conscience, not even enough decency to leave me with something to live on in my old age. If I could do it over, I would make these specific changes. Never put property in someone else's name, should have only bought a condo under the foreign quota. Something legally mine, never fund a business in a partner's name with no legal protection. If she wanted a business, she should have funded it herself, or I should have had ironclad contracts. Set firm financial boundaries from day one. Should have said from the start, this is what I'll contribute monthly. Nothing more. Listen, when family warned me, my daughter tried to tell me this was risky. My expat friends tried to warn me. I ignored all of them. Keep at least 50% of savings completely separate and untouchable. Should have kept $200,000 in an account she didn't know. About acceptance statement. I'm older now. I'm still living in the Philippines because I have no choice. I rent a small apartment that's nothing like the house I paid for. I eat cheap meals. I avoid hospitals because I can't afford the bills. And I spend most of my time alone, reading books from the library or sitting in malls with air conditioning. I wouldn't wish this situation on anyone. Going from $400,000 in a comfortable retirement plan to literally $69 in the bank and surviving month to month on Social Security, it's humiliating. It's terrifying. Every month I worry about unexpected expenses, about my health failing, about what happens if I can't afford my medications. Current relationship status. I'm still legally married to Bianca. She never filed for divorce, and I can't afford to. On paper, we're husband and wife. In reality, I haven't seen or heard from her since that one text message in 2023. I'd never trust a woman asking me for money again, especially not in a situation where there's such an obvious power imbalance. The age gap, the wealth gap, the cultural gap, I was vulnerable in every way, and she exploited all of it. I'm currently still living in Cebu City, in my small studio in Lahug. It's a neighborhood where most residents are Filipino working-class families. I'm one of maybe 3 foreigners in the entire building. It's safe enough, loud at times, but safe. Exact current finances, savings, $1,400, up from $69 2 years ago. I've been incredibly disciplined about saving $50 to $100 per month when possible. Monthly income. $2,100 from U.S. Social Security. Property owned, none debt, none comparison to before. I started with $400,000, which should have given me $1,200, $1,500 month in investment income on top of Social Security. I'd have been living comfortably, traveling, maybe even helping my daughter's family with their expenses. Instead, I'm counting pesos and rationing my medication to make it last longer. But I don't think you can look back at things and wonder too hard what would have been if I did things differently. It'll drive you insane. Daily life, now. I wake up early, usually around 6 a.m., when it's still relatively cool. I walk for exercise doctor's orders around the neighborhood for about 30 minutes. Most days I go to the local market and cook simple meals, rice, fish, vegetables, all cheap. I spend time at Ayala Mall or SM City Cebu because the air conditioning is free and I can sit and read. I've made a couple of expat friends who meet for coffee once a week, guys in similar situations, though most still have a bit more money than I do. Evenings I watch TV in my apartment or read Emotional State. I struggle every day. There's not really peace, just acceptance that this is my reality now. I'm not content, but I've made a kind of peace with the fact that I made terrible decisions and I'm living with the consequences. What happened to her? I do know now that my wife, she is still my wife, on paper, is living in Manila with the businessman she left me for. I heard this through mutual acquaintances, people who knew her family. She has a condo there, apparently a nice one, and she's not working. He's supporting her and Maya. The clinic space in Mandaue was taken over by a different business months after it closed. The house in Talamban is occupied by the family who bought it. I've driven past it a few times, and they've completely renovated it. It looks beautiful. I'm glad someone's enjoying it. She would have been in a lot better position if she'd just done what I advised, if she'd been honest, if she'd treated me with even basic respect. But she didn't, and therefore, she's living with a new man who she'll probably do the same thing to eventually. Perspective on Philippines. The Philippines itself is a beautiful country, and I'm sure, in fact, I'm guaranteed that there are real and genuine people there, and there are genuine relationships between foreigners and Filipinos. But there are also people like Bianca who see vulnerable foreigners as opportunities, who know exactly how to play the role of caregiver, partner, wife, while systematically extracting every peso they can. I'm not saying everybody's like that. In fact, I know most people aren't. But there are enough people like her that every foreign retiree needs to be extremely careful about who they trust and how much access they give to their finances. I'm telling this story because I want other people out there, other guys out there, to know what can happen. How easy it could be to lose $400,000 when you think with, let's just call it, your heart instead of your head. I didn't think I was naive. I was a 62-year-old man with decades of work experience, someone who'd successfully managed pharmaceutical sales territories worth millions of dollars. I thought I knew better. But I got played right from the start, just as easily as anyone else. Specific red flags to watch. If she immediately wants property in her name, that's not love, that's asset positioning. If family emergencies never stop and always require your money, you're not joining a family, you're funding one. If she pushes you to invest in businesses entirely in her name, you're not a partner, you're a source of capital. If she becomes defensive when you ask about finances, transparency is basic in any real relationship. If she isolates you from other expats or your home country family, isolation makes exploitation easier. If you see someone constantly asking for money while claiming it's about love and family loyalty, walk away. If you feel guilty for wanting to protect your assets in a relationship, that guilt is being weaponized against you. If you're being pressured to put everything in her name because we're married, what's mine is yours, remember that Philippine law doesn't see it that way. What's in her name is hers. Full stop. The core message: don't put property in her name without ironclad legal protection. Don't fund businesses you have no ownership of. And most importantly, don't give someone complete access to your finances just because you're married. Keep separate accounts, keep emergency funds, keep something that's yours alone. Trust is important in a relationship, but so is financial protection. And if she really loves you, she'll understand that. 4 years ago, I thought I was building a comfortable retirement in a tropical paradise with a woman who cared about me. I thought I'd found someone who'd take care of me as I got older, someone who valued me for more than just my bank account. 4 years later, I'm living in a studio apartment, alone, broke, and watching every peso. I've seen so many people since 2019 come to the Philippines with all the best intentions in the world, fall in love, invest everything they have, and end up in situations just like mine. Some lose everything. Some lose most of it but manage to keep a little. Some wise up early and get out. But there's a pattern, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. The fact that I still have my Social Security income and didn't end up completely destitute or homeless, that's got to be good enough for me. I compare my situation to guys I've heard about who lost even their pensions to scams, who ended up with nothing, and I think, at least I have $2,100 a month. It's a low bar, but it's reality. Closing wisdom. The Philippines was the country that I always found fascinating. It was a country I wanted to retire to and experience a different kind of life, and I thought genuine love could exist across age gaps and cultural differences. I quickly realized that, while genuine love might exist somewhere, what I experienced was a carefully executed long-term extraction operation. Even after all that happened, I don't hate the Philippines or Filipino people. I hate what happened to me, and I hate that I was too trusting, too desperate for connection, too willing to ignore obvious warning signs because I didn't want to be alone. The biggest lesson? When someone young and attractive shows romantic interest in someone old and financially comfortable, there's almost always a practical element to that interest. It doesn't mean love can't be part of it, but the practical element is always there, and if you ignore that reality, you'll end up like me, broke, alone, and wondering how you let it happen. Call back to title. I thought she promised to care for me, to be my partner in my retirement years, to build a life together. But what she actually did was systematically steal my $400,000 retirement fund while playing the role of devoted wife. Every promise was a setup. Every expression of love had a price tag attached. Just make better decisions if you want to retire abroad. Protect yourself legally. Keep your finances separate. And never, ever give someone complete control over everything you've worked for your entire life. You have been warned.